Good morning. Welcome to The Human Author. My name is Jen Cantwell, and today I'm going to be reading from my most recent book called The Warning. It's a work in progress right now. So I'm going to be reading the work I did for the past week, which is about chapters. If you have any questions about the Light Chaser series, you can learn more about it on my author website, which is jbcantwell.com. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start. And I left off last week at the very end of chapter 16. We're talking about Ronan the Wick. And here is the end of that chapter, and then I'll continue onward. I reached out for his hand, but he pulled it away from me, turned, and ran. It was only in those last final moments that I realized his intention, and I was too late. He ran to the edge of the precipice and did not even slow down, throwing himself off the cliff, powers gone. Torrin screamed, and this time everyone could hear him. I ran to the edge of the cliff, getting down on my hands and knees so I could see below. But as I searched for my new friend, I found that he had disappeared, and as I turned around to look at Kenneth and Brennen, the rest of the Wicks fell to the ground, dead. Chapter 17. No! Kenneth ran up behind me, dropping down on his stomach so he could see over the edge. But I didn't need him to explain. I'd seen everything, and now, somewhere below us, Ronan lay dead. I couldn't see him from where I was, but I felt certain that if we were to search, we would find him. He'd died as a man, not a Wick. I don't see him down there, Kenneth said. Did he fly away? Tears dropped from my eyes, following the same path as Ronan's body. Why had he done it? What had he known? I was gutted, unable to think of anything else other than the blame for his death was squarely on my shoulders. If it hadn't been for me. But no, there was part of me that understood that it didn't matter whether I had been involved or not. Torrin was the one responsible, and despite my flaws and acts of desperation, he was the true bad guy. It had nothing to do with me. My name was simply written on the page. I'd done nothing in my life but tried to survive. I was wondering if even that would be possible. Kenneth got to his feet, and I heard him talking to Brennen, his words unintelligible to my distracted and guilty mind. I understood the truth, the logic of the thing, but that didn't change how I felt. I felt responsible, and I couldn't think of a way to get past that. Finally, after a few minutes of guarded whispering, both Kenneth and Brennen walked up to me. Kenneth put one hand on my shoulder. Bree, he said, I think we should hear. He looked around, and the horrified look on his face was enough to tell me that we were in the middle of the remains of a massacre. Can you stand? I looked up at him, the wind blowing upon my tears, making my cheeks cool. I couldn't answer him, and a moment later he knelt down, brushing the hair away from my eyes. You're going to be okay, he said. His fingers touched my cheek, and this feeling of comfort was enough to bring on a wave of sobs. So many things I didn't deserve. Come on, he said after a few moments. Take my hands. He offered them to me, and I thought I wanted nothing more than to lay there and die. I took them. He pulled me up to standing. Bree, Brennen said quietly, we have to get out of here. Now it was him looking around. I didn't, though. I couldn't bear the sight of such carnage. I wondered how he was able to do it. He's grown up so fast. Suddenly, I was worried that Torrin would target him next. It seemed he had a way of reading my life and taking those who were most important to me, using them against me. It would have been wise for me to shrug off Brennan's kind words, to try to push him as far away from me as I could. Kenneth as well, for he was starting to grow on me. I might have been better off alone. After all, who was this fight between? Torrin and me, no one else. You're fighting for everyone's survival. But maybe the best way to fight was on my own. The best of intentions had resulted in nothing but horrors. But you need them. You may as well be dead without them. It was true. My greed in this way was unfair. Unfair to my friends, unfair to me, unfair to anyone foolish enough to follow me. It was time, though, for me to face what had just happened. I opened my eyes and turned around and around, taking in the sight of so many dead bodies down below. Did they even still have bodies? So many of them had disappeared in the past. It made me wonder why Ronan. He'd wanted nothing more than to survive, and despite the violence of the morning, he'd given us good information. He'd been helpful despite a millennium of torture, maybe more. He'd tried, and in the end, he'd paid the ultimate price. But he understood that his time had come, and more than anything, he'd wanted not to be returned to that master he'd followed for so long. Littering the valley floor, 20, 30 robes blew in the wind. How many did he have at his command? It was my greatest skill to possess. Was it Torin's as well? Or was it his maneuvering of his army simply a pastime? I could do better. I knew this for certain. Maybe if I were able to distract him long enough, I would be able to gain control over the wicks. Or maybe he'll just kill everyone. Maybe. Finally, after a few minutes of trying to process what I was seeing, I spoke. What should we do? Should we bury him? And what about the others? I don't think it would be wise for us to take any more travelers with us, Kenneth said. I don't know what's out there, but the events of this morning have been enough to tell me we should stick to just each other. No others should be part of this journey. It's too dangerous, both for them and for us. In a way, his words broke my heart. Was I to ignore Ronan's fallen comrades? And what about if we met someone else? Someone in need? I wasn't sure exactly how away we were from Eagleview. It might have been days, even weeks of travel. Would we really meet no one? Finally, I shook my head, trying to cover up the pain of what had just transpired in front of all of us. No? He asked. You are right, I said. I know I should listen to you, but I can't say what will happen before it's already transpired. Bree, it's okay if you want to move on without me, I said. Maybe this is too dangerous for all of us to be involved. He only wants me. But that's not true, Brennen said. He wants all of us. He wants control, and if Zahn has his way, Torin will soon take it. We don't know what he'll do with us, and we don't know what he's already done down in the dungeons. Brennen is right, Kenneth said. Come on. We should get out of here. We are too exposed. We can talk more about this as we walk. And what about Ronan? I asked. The idea of finding his broken body at the base of the cliff was over me. The truth was, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to handle it. We must leave him, Kenneth said, strength returning to his voice. If I've learned anything in the last couple of days, it's that we need to get back to Eagleview as quickly as possible. Wherever Torin is, he's watching us. I don't think that it matters that he knows where we are, but we would be wise to warn anyone else we come across. He is after us, and we shouldn't let anyone else become part of this journey. I nodded. We head home, keep our heads down, and get there as soon as we can. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Maybe with the others, with my family. Kenneth's face dropped, and the sadness that settled upon it was undeniable. I wondered what he knew, what he was keeping away from me. Was there more? Surely. It doesn't matter, I said. I won't much. I would rather defend my home than continue along this trail. There's too much misery out here in the world. It was true. I felt exhausted from it all. Torin had aimed for my heart and succeeded in skewering it. Wasn't this enough for him? Kenneth walked up to me, taking my hand in his and giving it a squeeze. We should get moving. We've been gone for months, the others and I. We don't know anymore what's happening inside the city. The sooner we get there, the better. I looked down at our hands entwined. What a strange feeling it was to be liked by anyone. It was was funny. I didn't feel uncomfortable with him touching, only comforted. I wondered what this meant. So, as the sun began to sink, we made our way down the hill and away from that place, and all of the carnage Torin had brought down upon us, hand in hand. I wasn't sure what to expect moving forward. There were so many unknowns, but one thing was certain. I was on a journey with two friends, and I knew beyond question that they had my back. As we walked through the grassland over the next few days, we came to a point where it was flat, not a hill in sight. For a while, I felt we were lost, or maybe in some sort of trap. Could Torin change the land, make it go on, finally taking us down by either insanity or death? It seemed that both of these things were possible, even likely. Surely he was looking for a fight, though. I was chewing on this idea, not understanding why he wouldn't meet me face to face. Maybe I should have gone with the Wicks when he'd told me to, but part of me doubted that it would have ended well. It had become clear that he himself wanted to be the one to kill me, but why was he stalling? What did he have to lose? In recent days, my confidence about my own powers was beginning to wane. Yes, I'd been able to enter Ronan's mind, just as I had others before him, but did that mean I was strong enough to fight a sorcerer such as Torin, or even Zahn? I wasn't sure. One afternoon that had felt like tens of hours, I knelt down in the grass and pulled water. When the other turned around, they both began shouting out my name, not seeing me below the tips of the blades. "I'm right here," I said. "You don't have to yell. I'm just thirsty and tired." These last two words were more true than anything these days. I found I frequently wanted little more than to find the escape that sleep allowed. My nightmares had ceased, giving me hours upon hours of sweet blackness. In my slumber, I didn't need to solve any problems. Didn't need to run from monsters. The farther we got on our journey, the more panicky I'd begun to feel. I frequently found that it was difficult walking, that all I wanted to do was curl up into a little ball and hide. I doubted that such things would be considered or even cared about by anyone I knew. I was growing exhausted, tired from the need to constantly protect myself and those around me. I thought back to Zamira, and not for the first time I wished that things had turned out differently. I'd felt so guilty leaving my friends and behind when I'd taken off for Zamira. But the truth was, I wished none of that would have happened, that Aaron would have been kind, and that I would have been able to stay. Now I'd been thrown back into the thick of it. Escaping my responsibilities was something that hadn't worked, but that didn't keep me from wishing otherwise. I should have been encouraged, angered by Torin's show of power over the Wicks. It should have propelled me toward the next part of our journey, but it didn't. Instead, it just made me tired, hopeless. Kenneth and Brennen walked up to me, then knelt down in the grass to drink. Brennen went first, then sat up and wiped his mouth with the sleeve of his tunic. "I'm starting to get tired," he said. "Can we take a break?" It had already been a number of days since we'd had our last sip of light. I only had the one vial remaining, and nobody had spoken of it until now. After Kenneth had drunk his fill, he sat up and looked at me. "How much is left?" He didn't need to explain what he was talking about. "Just one vial," I said. "We used almost all of it back with Ronan. I've been saving it until we reached a point of desperation." Kenneth sat back upon his heels. "I kind of think we're there." I couldn't deny that this was true, that the fair thing would be for the three of us to share, and yet I was hesitant to give any of it away, even a small sip. Since we'd left that terrible place littered with Wick's robes, I'd been trying to think of a time to drink it myself and leave the others out. Then I would be done, no chance for me to get violent again as I hoarded it for myself. "I guess you're right, but I wish we knew how much longer we would be on the journey home. Part of me thinks we should save it until we're in dire straits. But if you think it's better to take it now, I'll go with you." Kenneth looked over at Brennen and then nodded his head. I think it's time. I unstrapped my traveling pack and dug through it for the revial. I was already thinking through the process of sharing. When I pulled it out and held it up to the sun, the shimmering aquamarine blue was enough to entrance anybody. For a moment, I almost removed the stopper, thinking to drink it all myself. But then Kenneth cleared his throat and held out one hand. I think we should go first, he said. I looked up from the vial, knowing he was right, but wishing I was alone with no need to share a single drop. Brennen sat up, eyes suspiciously. He's right, he said. I saw you the last time. It had been many days, but I remembered it perfectly, the feeling that I needed to get at the light, to take every little bit of it into my system. I'd been foolish thinking I was in command of myself. I supposed having lasted as long as I did was something I thought meant I was strong. But was I really? Kenneth didn't wait for me to come to any conclusion. He reached out and took the vial right out of my hand. Before I even had a chance, he tipped it back, taking 1/3 of the little that remained. Then he passed it to Brennen. I watched all of this on high alert. I couldn't deny the feeling I'd had. That terrible day with Colm had returned. But not wanting to risk my chance to take the rest, I didn't act. Instead, I waited for my turn. I tried not to show the spot on my hand where my fingernails were scratching into my skin with agitation. After Brennen took his sip, he handed me what remained. I made it a point not to look at it too carefully, for if I did, I worried I would try to enact some sort of revenge. They didn't deserve it, but the darkness I'd been feeling of late was still there, alive and well, despite my warm feeling toward my friends. I downed what was left, and just as before, I found the light to be weak. Is it just me, or does it sound as it used to? I asked. Kenneth shrugged. I've never had light before now. Is it usually much stronger than this? Brennen spoke up. She's right. I used to be over It used to be overwhelming to drink this stuff. Now I feel like it will slip away soon. He looked over at me. So you feel it too? Definitely. I guess it's a good thing that this is the last of it. I wonder if it will get to the point that it's no longer stronger than water. But no, that's not possible. I don't believe it. I can't believe it. Considering we had nothing more than grass and water to keep us fed for the remainder of our journey, I found myself relieved that the light was gone now. Without it, there was no chance for violence or jealousy, two things that didn't belong in my mind. But for now, weak as it was, the light gave a little kick, making me forget that my stomach was empty and bringing me newfound energy. I stood up. Let's get moving while we can. I don't know how long this light will last. We'd be smart to take it at a jog until it wears off. The other two didn't argue, and soon we were all on our feet and headed east. Despite our efforts, I still found I was able to keep up the pace without any problem. Just like it had been climbing that hill with Brennen, my energy stayed strong. This feels good, Kenneth said as he ran beside me. How long do you think it will last? I'm not sure, I said. If this were 6 months, I might say several hours, maybe even a couple of days. But now I don't know. We'll just have to take advantage of it as we go. Maybe we'll be lucky enough to come upon another keeper. But as the hours wore on, we didn't encounter anyone. No lawmen, no lifters, no chasers. It seemed we had the wildlands to ourselves. Finally, after running for a good 5 hours, the sun began to set. We crossed over into the desert land that would last all the way till Eagleview. We were getting closer to home. I wasn't sure what would await us there. More light? Torture? Would my father and grandmother and Regan still be there at all? As the day came to a close, we didn't stop. I could feel the effects of the light beginning to slip away, but it only made sense to take the last vestiges of energy we could. Maybe this meant we'd be sleeping in the dirt, but my eagerness to make it home was stronger than my desire for comfort. A war was brewing, and the closer we got, the more eager I became to protect those I loved and to take back my home kingdom. Maybe I would even come to control it myself. It was too soon to know, so I pushed the idea out of my mind and focused on the little information I had. Brennen had told us what had happened. That was just going to have to be good enough for me. Chapter 18. I didn't start to tire until the sun was coming up again. We were in the land of caves, where shade was free available, hiding spots all around. I turned to the others. I think we should find somewhere to hide for the afternoon. We don't know who's out there. I looked around nervously, half expecting some beast or another to jump out at us. If there were such animals, it would be likely that they were hiding light in their lairs. Just another reason to wish for that type of conflict. But my friends didn't deserve such a hunger, nor did they deserve the job of watching over me, waiting for the fight. I couldn't help. I'd been trying to temper my desire for the liquid magic, but it was easier said than done. I found that even the mention of it was enough to make my mouth water and stomach rumble. Finally, after walking for another hour, we reached the end of the strange rock formations. Somewhere in the distance, our home was waiting for us, but we needed time to rest, time to plan. It will only take us 2 days to make it back home from here, I said. We should stop. Maybe we can keep a lookout and determine how dangerous this last leg of the journey will be. I haven't seen anyone yet, but that doesn't mean they're not out there waiting. Kenneth was beginning to look tired, but Brennen clearly still had enough energy to continue. Maybe it was because he was smaller than us and the light affected him differently. I couldn't be sure. That sounds like a good plan to me, Kenneth said. Where do we go? He looked around. You see those rocks at the top of the hill? I asked. There will be hidden places there. That's where we should start. He looked somewhat crestfallen at the idea of climbing another hill, but he agreed. You've been here before? I chuckled. Yes, though last time the circumstances were much different. We didn't have light, but food and water were satisfying enough. Maybe if we meet another fiend, we can find more sustenance. I'm not holding my breath, though. But was that true? No, it wasn't. It was a throwaway statement, easy for any of us to make, but I was holding my breath, waiting for an opportunity. Just wait until you're in the tower. The last time I'd been to the tower in Eagleview, Zahn had a pool, almost a fountain of light. I wasn't sure where all of it had come from, but the rumors were that he used his students to collect light for him, either by stealing it from the chasers or going out into the world themselves and stealing it from the keepers. I wondered how much he had. It made me think of the time on my way to Zamira when I'd been able to my fill of the stuff. The strength of it had lasted for days, and looking back, it had been the beginning of my dependency. Maybe this time I would be able to get to it first, to beat Zahn once and for all. What if he's there? What if Torin is waiting for you? Well, that would be it then. We would each try to kill the other. I didn't have any false illusions. War was war, and Torin wanted my head. For whatever reason, he wanted or needed to kill me himself. That was the only explanation I could come to on my own for why I wasn't dead already. At least when we finally came face to face, I would get answers, if nothing else. Come on, I said. We should get moving. The sooner we make it up there, the sooner we can rest for the afternoon. Kenneth nodded, clearly tired, but Brennen looked disappointed. I thought we were going to go until the effects of the light wore off. What happened to that plan? Kenneth said. Maybe not for you, but for the two of us. Maybe you can use your extra energy to look for food. Have you seen anything this morning? At this, Brennan pulled out a thick pocketful of weeds. I glanced down at his fist, which was tightly gripping the grasses. This is all I have, he said. I turned to Kenneth. Before you left, how was the food situation in the kingdom? Those in the fields are still working, so grain has been to find. But as far as trading goes for fresh meat and vegetables, it's been a little bit dire. I think the kids out in the garbage patches are hurting. I remembered my friend Adair, just a little kid forced to forage for his meals. I wondered how he'd gotten into that situation. One of the kids known as pickers. I supposed it was better than the orphanage, and he was a slippery little guy. I hoped he was still alive. Come on, I said, taking the first steps up the hill. Brennen, stay with us. We need to be careful. He must have sighed, but I didn't listen. Together we began the climb. It didn't take us long to find a couple of places to hide. I was heartened by the fact that we hadn't seen any lawmen out searching. Maybe they understood that surviving the conditions in the wildlands was not necessarily the easiest thing to do. It made more sense that they'd been looking in the forest. Hopefully, they would continue to make that mistake, and we would stay safe. At first, when we had to get settled in a small cave, we were constantly on alert, always feeling like Torin or even Zahn was one step ahead of us. But after a couple of hours had passed, we all started to relax. I offered to take the first watch and was grateful that, for once, Kenneth allowed it. He'd been looking especially rough in the past few hours as the power of the light had begun to fade. Light doesn't solve everything, especially not now. As I looked out from our hidden place of the many nights I'd spent with Father in this land, I hadn't liked him then, and even at the end of it, it had been hard for me to determine just how I felt about him. I still hadn't done it, but I had a feeling that this time I was headed home to something. Of course, grandmother had tried her very best with me for my entire life, but now that I'd finally reconciled with Father, I hoped he was still there when I arrived. I hoped they all were. When I'd met Erin back in Zamira, she'd spoken of a rift between herself and Zahn, and it would follow that the things now might be in disarray. It could be something as simple as trying to rally untrained sorcerers, those who had hidden, been found, and then required to act. Having to babysit 50 sorcerers might prove to be a hindrance, but surely he wouldn't take the risk that they would rise up against him on their own. Babysitting or not, it was better than losing the war, losing me. All this time, I'd been gathering people to my quest to bring down Torin, but the time would soon come that I would need to make a battle plan. I had hundreds rallying behind me already, people willing to fight in my name. But where was Torin? Did he have his own army too? The Wicks. Yes, and if they were all like Ronan had been, maybe I could sway them to my side. Ronan had clearly been traumatized, begging us not to allow him to become caught, begging us to kill him instead. I tried to imagine how much pain and misery that poor man had been through, enough to easily accept death as a suitable alternative to being in Torin's army. In the end, he had made that choice on his own, and how could we blame him? He lived in terror, thinking that every second that passed by was one step closer to being enslaved all over again. With time came risk. I didn't know if I would have been able to handle it either, but maybe if I could get a group of them together, I could be able to launch a counteroffensive. Would he allow it to happen? What clever battle plan? What a clever battle plan that might be. He might just let members of his army go so that they could direct me to him wherever he was. I needed to turn it upside down. I needed to come from behind. Or I needed to run. When I had left for Zamira, it had been because I was tired of being hurt and outdone and always at risk. I wanted to go somewhere new, where nobody knew who I was. I wanted to escape. But this was a new idea. If I ran, I could save all of my friends, all of the people who were supporting me now. If I was so important, wouldn't Torin come after me and leave the rest behind? Would his army still battle mine? Maybe not. I looked back at Kenneth and Brennen, both of them sleeping soundly. I could go right now, and they won't realize for hours. I could be anywhere by then. I'd promised them I wouldn't break us up again by running, but this felt different. If I ran now, I could save hundreds, maybe thousands of people. But then, as I realized my mouth was dry, I understood that my idea was flawed. If I left now, I would have no food and no money. Water I could always get, but the rest of the things vital to life I might need to travel were gone. Not only that, but I would be leaving my friends in the same situation. I would be declining to help them to make it home alive. After I turned back to look out of the entrance, I wondered if that little hare was still out and about. I remembered her babies tucked so delicately into her little nest. She had risked all to save us that very first time. How many people would be willing to do the same? I was just one girl. Were they fighting for my life or somehow their own as well? Surely they were. Here was a place I might be able to sneak in. Those sorcerers, from babes to the ancient, probably resented the fact that they were being kept under control. In fact, it was likely I would be able to convince them as well. I was happy for this time alone to think. The more I pondered the road ahead, my road ahead, the less I found myself craving more light. Would I be able to leave it behind in the end? And what about my friends? Yes, I could lead the enemy away. If I could build up an army left to take on Zahn and his students, I might be able to slip away when no one was paying attention. Then, when Torin recognized my trick, he would come after me, his attention away from the battle. It just might work. I wondered where he was now. Could he somehow see me? I'd been tracked by a tracker many months ago. It had felt more like he sniffed me out than saw me. Maybe it was the same for Torin. Maybe he was a tracker. But it didn't matter. This idea that had popped into my head when I was faced with a silent afternoon was a good one. But I had to do one thing at a time. First, I had to make it back to Eagleview in one piece. Then I would need to find my father, grandmother, and Regan and hide them. But where? Immediately I thought of the sleeping tree, and an automatic response gained after so many years of hiding within its branches, but was gone now, swallowed up by Zahn and his pupils. It had been Erin herself who'd taken down the final tree in the oak grove. She'd given me warning, shared ideas about how I might escape. She'd helped me, even though I'd been told not to trust her. Of course, I determined why not to befriend her several months later. I had barely made it out of that conflict with my life. But one thing was certain. Erin had been working alone, without influence from Zahn or Torin. There was evil everywhere. But as I looked down at my sleeping friends, I realized there was good, too. After a while, as the sun began to set, I shook them both awake. "It's almost time to get moving," I said. Kenneth sat up with a groan. "What about you? You didn't sleep." I shrugged. "I'm not tired." It was the truth. Brennen sat up, rubbing his eyes. He took a look out through the opening to the cave at the desert below. "We're walking through that? It'll be easy in the darkness, Ed. I can pull water if any of us gets thirsty, and hopefully we can make it to the sleeping tree by the end of the night." "What's the sleeping tree?" Kenneth asked. I guessed not everybody knew. Maybe Zahn had kept it a secret, but then I thought that few people knew about it. Maybe Zahn had wanted it that way. There was a grove of oak trees a couple of hours away from the kingdom. I said. Zahn had his students destroy them, but before he could, the sleeping tree had saved me. It had its own sort of magic. It has hidden me many times through my life. I don't know who else it is. I don't know who else it let itself be known to, but it was sort of like a friend. It's hard to explain, but let me just say, my heart broke that day. I wasn't willing to speak further on the topic, but I resolved to walk through what remained of that grove of trees on my way back to Eagleview. I could pay my respects to the entity that had hidden me for so long. I doubt if I would ever find a place like that again. Was there somewhere out there I could hide? My new plan, still a secret, was swirling around in my head. I hoped that what I had in mind didn't equal cowardice. I strapped my pack onto my shoulders and moved out. Kenneth and Brennen scrambling to get their things put back into their bags and follow. A few steps away, on a small stone precipice, I looked out over the wild lands, the first place I'd ever traveled to. It was so far away from too far for a young girl to go alone, but I wasn't young anymore. Oriana's death had resulted in my growing up far too quickly. Sometimes growing up happens in unexpected ways and in unexpected places. As it turned out, a lifetime of scrounging in the streets hadn't been the thing that had turned me into a woman. It was, instead, the loss of my best friend that had done it. I was an adult now, and yet still I found myself wanting to hide. Good idea. I would find out, and soon. I turned back to the others. You about ready? I asked. In answer, they both emerged and took in the view. You're sure it's safe? Kenneth asked. Nowhere is safe, I said, and I stepped down from the stone and began walking down the hill. I was heading toward an unknown future with an unknown plan, but the three of us together would have to be enough to get us home. I would figure out what came next once we arrived, if we slept long enough to make it there. Okay, that's what I have for this week. You can join me again next Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific right here. If you have any questions about The Human Author, you can email me, jen@thehumanauthor.com, and I'd be happy to answer them. Everybody have a great weekend, and thank you for joining.